good height for you? I'll talk loud. Has a big range. It's afternoon, right? Oh, good afternoon. My name is Linan Palit, and I am the gallery director here at Vashon Center for the Arts, and I'm also in charge of the Talks on the Rock. So I just want to give a quick intro, and also, first of all, really like to mention that the Talks on the Rock lectures are made possible with the support from Tom and Ida Gay Nicolino and Ellen Kreitzman. So we really want to thank them. So in thinking about what to start today, I just wanted to say that when Marcy came to us and started talking, I think that I got a reinforced appreciation about Vashon in the sense that we know we have a treasure here, but the people are also such a treasure besides our beautiful environment. And one of the things that is that I'm always amazed on who lives here, who you just is in Thriftway or walking down whatever, that people that are, they're international known musicians and artists, and there's activists here that are doing amazing work both locally and internationally. And Marcy's work is another example of that to me. She has the Alliance for Topo Tico Conservation, also known as an ALTO, which is so much easier to talk about. And it was formed when some local villagers were in Topo Tica, and she was working there, and they wanted her to help with the disappearance of their beloved bird, the Maleo bird. And so she assembled a team of local, national, and international participants, and they worked side by side and started their first conservation effort in 2006. So it's an example of our little island doing a huge outreach to another island halfway across the world and making this sort of impact in an environmental way. And I think that's really a special thing. So Marcy is the co-founder and director of ALTO, and she's been the recipient of a number of leadership awards and innovation. For 13 years, she worked as a scientist for the Natural Conservatory, or TNC, in the United States, Indonesia, and New Guinea. And then she left there in 2006 to form this nonprofit called ALTO. So today, we welcome Marcy to tell us more about her work.
Thank you, Linan. My name is Marcy Summers. I direct the Alliance for Topo Tica Conservation, Alianza Conservasi Topo Tica, or as Linan said, just ALTO will do. And I'm going to talk with you about our work in conservation in Sulawesi, Indonesia. But first, I want to make sure, if you haven't already done so, that you take some time to look at the wonderful mural of Sulawesi and Pacific Northwest wildlife that was done by 4th and 5th graders out in the lobby. In my talk, I'm going to touch on some of the art for conservation work that we sponsor in Indonesia, but it's been our pleasure also to work with the VCA and the Harbor School to sponsor this marvelous project. So please be sure to take a look before you leave today. Once upon a time, there was a planet. It was just an average planet among many, many others, but this planet came to life. Over about 4.5 billion years, that life evolved into all manner of wondrous and beautiful creatures of all kinds. Now, the remarkable group that we're a part of, the humans, are all utter newcomers on this planet. For the first 4 billion years or so of Earth's history, there were no humans at all. Modern humans first evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. And then around 100,000 years ago, we began spreading to other parts of the globe. But our populations remained very small, less than 2 million, until about the time of Jesus, around AD 1. Human populations remained low through the first few centuries AD, or what we call the Common Era. Let's see if I can work this thing. There, yes. But just in the last few hundred years, the number of humans on our planet has skyrocketed. We reached the first billion about 600 years ago, and there are now over 8 billion of the species that we're a part of, Homo sapiens, on planet Earth. Now, very generally, the impact of any species, whether that's wolves or locusts or black-tailed deer, on the rest of nature, on everything and everybody else that it shares the planet with, is the population of that species times the per capita consumption of each individual. In exactly the same way, our total human impact on the planet is determined by the number of people times per capita consumption, what each one of us consumes. And you can break down human consumption into consumption of energy and consumption of materials, stuff. Because for the last few thousand years, but only for the past few thousand years, we don't have to live this way. We humans have chosen to live with increasingly elaborate technology. And those technologies and lifestyles produce a more and more ravenous demand for energy every day. This graph shows how consumption of energy, like population, has also skyrocketed over the past century or so. So that was consumption of energy. Now here, the middle green line of this graph shows the increase in our consumption of materials, stuff, just in the past few years. So we're zooming in on just 2000 to 2019 compared to centuries in the previous graph, which is why it doesn't look as steep. But here we see that in only 19 years, we humans have increased the amount of stuff that we consume by 50%. Now, human consumption of materials and energy is not evenly distributed in human societies. And each of us in the global consumer class who, for instance, eat a lot of meat and use the internet constantly, each of us is consuming many times more every day than the poor villagers that I'm going to be talking about in Indonesia. So our global consumption is rising even faster than our population there. And that's on you and me. We are the global consumer class. This is a critically important fact to keep in mind, always, and approach all our global dealings with humility and a commitment to try to improve, especially when our partners are poor villagers who consume almost nothing in comparison. For us in the global consumer class, the single most important thing we can do to help the planet is to stop increasing, or better yet, reduce how much we consume. And so what's the effect on our brother and sister species of Homo sapiens commandeering the planet's resources for ourselves without restraint? The effect, well, one effect, is extinction. And here you see that the extinction of, sorry, pressed the wrong button. Here you see that the extinction of other species has also skyrocketed. Every day, our planet is becoming more and more impoverished of that wonderful life that makes Earth so special. This is grim, friends, for all people and all life. We humans are destroying things for everyone. I cannot put a happy face on that. But I can tell you a few stories about what keeps some of us going in the face of it. Let's go to Indonesia in Southeast Asia. to what today is called the island of Sulawesi. So here in Sulawesi, we can see in microcosm the very same dynamics that we were just talking about for the whole planet Earth. So once upon a time, there was an island. We call it Sulawesi. For millions of years, beautiful and wondrous and strange creatures evolved on this island. A majority of the living creatures on the island were entirely unique and found nowhere else on Earth. The island was green and verdant and full of life. And for the first several million years of the island's existence, there were no humans on it at all. But there were tiny gremlin-like tarsiers. Tiny gremlin-like tarsiers. Primates, giant predators called civets, insect-eating pitcher plants, babyrusas with weird curly tusks that came back to their skulls, huge graceful hornbills, and all manner of goodly creatures. And then about 50,000 years ago, the first humans colonized the island. They made homes and hunted and killed other wildlife, but for many thousands of years, their populations remained low, less than about 10,000 people. 2 of these little blue icons represent 10,000 people. Come on. There we go. But just like in the world at large, in the past few hundred years, the human population on Sulawesi has skyrocketed. Now there are over 20 million people on Sulawesi. And just like in the world at large, we have destroyed and consumed a great deal of the other life with whom we shared the island. What's happened with the Maleo bird is a good example of what's happened to most wildlife in Sulawesi. In the early days of human presence on Sulawesi, there were few humans and lots of Maleos. When humans took and consumed Maleo eggs, there weren't that many people doing so, and there were lots of Maleos still left. So the impact was small. But now the situation is reversed. Now there are many humans and only a very few Maleos left. So every time people take and consume Maleo eggs, the impact is very severe. To the point where, today, the Maleo hovers right at the edge of extinction. Our team has done the scientific research. What is causing the decline of the Maleo is, first and foremost, the taking of Maleo eggs by humans. And secondly, it is the destruction of the Maleo's forest habitat, again, by humans. What will happen next? Pretty much all the major religions and spiritual traditions on our planet recognize that the earth does not belong to humans, and that we're only one of many species, all of which were put here by a loving creator, and which it is a terrible crime to destroy. In the words of the Holy Quran, there is not a creature crawling on the earth, nor any bird that wings its flight, but they are nations like unto yourselves. So any extinction is a great tragedy. But if the marvelous Maleo were lost, an entire chapter in the Book of Life would be lost forever, because this bird is absolutely unique on our planet. Let me introduce you to the Maleo. Adult Maleos spend most of their time in pairs in Sulawesi's tropical rainforest, foraging for nuts and fruits and invertebrates, and hanging out with their friends. But when a pair are ready to lay an egg, they travel many kilometers, primarily on foot, to reach a communal nesting area on a sunny beach or near a hot spring. There, they'll spend up to 3 days digging around to find the perfect spot to lay just one egg. Now, an adult Maleo is about the same size as a chicken. On the left is a chicken egg. That's a Maleo egg. Maleos literally invest their all into this one huge, precious egg. The female lays the egg in the pit they have dug, and then the parents cover the egg back up with sand. And then they leave and go back to the forest, entrusting their child, their future, to the friendliness of the world. For they will take no part in raising it. The egg will be incubated solely by the warmth of the sun on the sand, and then 2 or 3 months later, the chick will hatch 1 meter deep in the sand and burrow its way up to the surface. When it emerges, it will rest only for a few seconds, and then poof, off it flies into the forest to grow up and make its way entirely on its own. Here are a few more things that make the Maleo really special. First of all, it's endemic. It is found only on Sulawesi. The IUCN, which is sort of like the United Nations for nature, has ranked the Maleo as critically endangered. They keep track of all the world's species, no matter what country they're in, and Maleos are critically endangered. The Maleo's been fully protected under Indonesian law since at least 1970. Taking the eggs or hunting the birds is completely illegal, even if the laws are never enforced. The Zoological Society of London, ZSL, has produced something called the Evolutionarily Distinct and Globally Endangered, EDGE list. And in that, they're ranking, the Maleo is the 19th highest priority bird for conservation on the entire planet. The Indonesian government has ranked the Maleo as the number 14 top priority for species conservation, just under orangutans and tigers and rhinos. And finally, the Maleo plays a very important role in Sulawesi culture. Maleo is in fact the official mascot of many provinces and localities in Sulawesi, and you see it everywhere on statues and brand logos and shop names and the like. The government's awareness of the importance of Maleo has grown so much in recent years that a couple of years ago, the Indonesian government gave it its own day. Now, like Earth Day or World Employee Appreciation Day, there is a World Maleo Day, and it falls every year on November 21st. So the sad fact is that despite its importance, the Maleo has been in steep decline throughout its entire range in Sulawesi. But I'd like to tell you the story of what happened in Tompotika, which is this peninsula at the far eastern tip of Sulawesi's central arm. Here's what happened. In the early 2000s, I was living and working in Indonesia for one of the large international conservation NGOs. And at the time, I was in charge of a biodiversity assessment for the whole island of Sulawesi. So one day in 2004, while assessing forests near a remote village in Tompotika, I came across what I realized was one of the last best remaining communal nesting grounds of the now critically endangered Maleo bird. That day, I watched quietly from the sidelines as 2 Maleo pairs spent hours digging their nest pits and each laying their single egg. And as I watched, so did 2 men from the local village whose turn it was to dig eggs that day. The laws forbidding egg taking were routinely ignored. As soon as the birds finished laying their eggs, the 2 men went onto the nesting ground and dug them up. I asked them, "Do you ever leave eggs, or do you dig them all?" And their answer was, "Well, if we don't take it, a monitor lizard, or someone else will. Later that day, I'd been asked to give a presentation in the village about Sulawesi wildlife. So I showed them pictures of all kinds of wonderful, unique Sulawesi creatures, and I told them how much Sulawesi was admired in the world for its wildlife. And then I said, and you know, you still have Maleo here in your village. Do you realize how special that is? Do you realize that the Maleo only lives in Sulawesi, and they're already gone almost everywhere else that they used to be? Well, they did not realize that. And further, I asked, do you realize that if you keep taking every egg, as you're doing now, they will eventually be gone here as well, just like they're already gone almost everywhere else? Is that what you want? Because that's the boat you're on. Well, they'd never really thought about it that way before. They'd noticed Maleo numbers steadily declining, but they'd never really thought about the ultimate end where that would lead. So after the presentation, a bunch of people came up to me and said, no, that isn't what we want. We don't want to lose our Maleos. Ibu, that's like Mrs., will you help us? Will you help us figure out some kind of conservation program so that the Maleo won't disappear? So thus began what I thought would be just a series of a few discussion meetings. But over the coming months, one thing led to another. I ended up leaving the big NGO where I worked, and we pulled together a group made up of local conservationists, together with others from elsewhere in Indonesia and the international community. I also moved back home to Vashon, where after an Audubon presentation I gave in 2005, a similar thing happened. And a number of people came forward saying yes, they were eager to help build a partnership with this village to prevent the extinction of the Maleo bird in Sulawesi. We had a bunch of meetings, held a fundraiser, and in 2006, 7 of us traveled to Sulawesi to help launch the first project of the new Alliance for Tompotika Conservation, Aliansi Konservasi Tompotika, ALTO. And so on August 1st, 2006, villagers voluntarily decided to end poaching of Maleo eggs at their site. The entire community had been invited into the conversation, and everyone's opinion was listened to. Not 100% were on board at the beginning, but all agreed to try it for 6 months and see how it went. Every family was involved, but where before they took turns poaching the eggs, now they took turns at the job of guarding them, together with a handful of young college students from the local Nature Lovers Club. And after the 6-month trial period, it was so successful that nobody wanted to stop. So we just kept going. And the approach we took is not necessarily easy, but it's pretty simple, and it hasn't changed much since those first days in 2006. Working together in partnership, we prevent egg poaching by humans, protect forest habitat, and let nature do the rest. As a result, the normal daily view of the nesting ground has been transformed from this, when I first visited the site in 2004, to this, which is what it looks like now. Maleo numbers here at the Taima Libun have increased 7-fold in 17 years, and this has become, by far, the healthiest and most populous Maleo nesting ground on the planet. We've counted as many as 199 Maleo birds at once on the nesting ground. Yes. Such a recovery of the Maleo has never been seen before anywhere, and it's not being seen anywhere else. And we've been publishing the results and spreading the word. But it's not only Maleo numbers that have been recovering. It's also Maleo behaviors and, if you like, culture. What we've seen when we let Maleos nest safely on their own time without disturbance is a whole range of behaviors and social interactions that simply are not seen anywhere else. Preening, dancing, just hanging out and resting, single moms, even the rare mating ritual. This is what happens when we humans simply respect Maleos enough to stop interfering with them. So we're really happy about seeing the Maleo numbers increase so much. That's clear, measurable, and very gratifying. This critically endangered species is actually recovering. But to me, even though I don't fully understand any of them, these newly recovering aspects of Maleo culture that we've been privileged to witness are just as exciting and open the possibility of all that we have yet to learn about these marvelous birds. And what is the secret of all this success? It starts with respect. Respect for people. When you're doing this work, everybody needs to have a seat at the table, including the poachers. And respect for the rest of nature, which, despite the way we typically treat her, is not there just to serve us and has an integrity and a wisdom beyond our ken. We can learn so much from listening to her. As the ancient wisdom of the book of Job instructs us, ask now the animals, and they will teach you. The birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they will teach you. But what does that actually mean to respect nature? Well, let's take a look at the dozen or so other Maleo conservation efforts in existence. These are run by government, NGOs, and industry corporate social responsibility departments, and they all take a different approach from Alto's. At all other Maleo conservation projects, after the Maleo pair lays their eggs at a nesting ground, it is dug up and placed in a hatchery or an incubator. Those chicks that eventually hatch out are often held for some period of time, weeks or months, in a so-called habituation cage before being released. In actuality, most of these programs actually cause a net loss of Maleos, and not one of them has shown increases like what we've seen through protecting the entire nesting ground and letting eggs hatch naturally. For us in Tompotika, respect for nature means we do not remove eggs to a hatchery, but we leave them undisturbed to hatch right in the place where those females so carefully laid them. And unlike other projects, which blame and kill them against the evidence, we don't interfere with monitor lizards. The adult Maleos ignore them, and so do we. More recently, in addition to our flagship Taimalibun site, we have also started similar efforts with 2 other Maleo villages. And these have both also increased at least 4-fold. Thus, at 3 out of 3 locations where we've tried this approach, we're seeing dramatic Maleo recoveries. The Alto respect for nature approach has been so successful that people are taking notice all over Sulawesi, and we're helping with advice and resources for other groups that want to start Maleo conservation efforts in their places. We're also exploring how the respect for nature approach could also help recover populations of other threatened wildlife species all over Sulawesi and beyond. Alto in Indonesia has now grown to a staff of 15 full-time conservation professionals, almost all of whom are local Tompotikans whom we've trained up for the job. And we have 2 staff based here in the US, myself and Galen over there. We're registered nonprofits and have boards in both the US and Indonesia, plus an international advisory council, and we now have a sizable global network with supporters in 14 countries. And listening to the greatest needs of Tompotika as heard from local people and natural systems, we now have a whole variety of programs of 4 major types. Alto defines conservation success as healthy wild nature, including people, in Tompotika and beyond. And we pursue it through field-based conservation programs to protect a variety of threatened species, outreach programs to engage people's hearts and minds, quality of life programs that enhance the lives of the human communities and individuals we work with, and research programs that help discover and expand the deep wells of scientific and traditional knowledge that we draw from. Now, in 17 years of operations, we've chalked up quite a few tangible successes. For the Maleo, we've actually reversed the decline of this critically endangered species at multiple locations. We've saved tens of thousands of sea turtles and bats, created new government-declared protected areas and made sure they weren't just on paper. We've prevented the destruction of 10,000 hectares, which is about 25,000 acres of tropical rainforest, which in turn is harboring biodiversity and sequestering around 3 million tons of carbon. We've helped wildlife laws get enforced for the first time, educated tens of thousands of kids and adults, and involved tens of thousands of people in conservation activities of various kinds. But lest you think it's all been smooth sailing, let me assure you, it has not. Only a stubborn persistence has kept us from folding our tents up a long time ago. Take the kids, for instance. These 12 Tompotika High School kids are drama cast members for Alta's Festival, which is an arts festival event that we now hold every other year. In this role, they come together for 3 weeks to learn about Maleo and ecology and put on an original drama, which they then perform in villages all over Tompotika. As part of this experience, many of them learn about Maleo, visit the Maleo nesting ground, and see Maleo for the very first time in their lives. But in this year, 2014, the Kids' Festival happened to fall during a dark time in our history. Our collaboration agreement with the village had expired, and we had not yet successfully agreed on a new contract. So a handful of men had decided to resume egg poaching. When the kids visited the nesting ground to see Maleos, they watched as these men went onto the nesting ground and dug up Maleo eggs. The kids were incredulous and incensed. How could these men be breaking the law and poaching the eggs of the endangered and culturally iconic species? How come this was being allowed to happen? We explained that although we'd repeatedly begged the local police and the wildlife agency to come and enforce the law, it had not happened. And as Alto, we had no authority to stop the poaching. The kids were terribly upset, and after long discussions, they decided that they wanted to write a letter themselves to the authorities to urge them to enforce the laws and stop the poaching. Through a long and thoughtful process, the kids crafted a letter to the authorities, respectfully but firmly requesting that they fulfill their duty and enforce the laws protecting Maleos. It was an articulate and compelling letter, and we were so proud of those kids. I'm sorry to say that the authorities seem to have ignored the letter and never did anything. However, fortunately, within a few weeks, our Alto team in the village managed to reach a new agreement, and the poaching did end. And although the letter did not have the effect originally intended, a wonderful and long-lasting effect that the letter did have was that it galvanized those 12 kids and formed them into inspired and determined conservation advocates and activists. Since that incident, a small but steady stream of festival graduates have been coming to join the Alto team as full-time staff and committing their lives to conservation, like Leanne here. This is the new and hopeful face of conservation in Indonesia. Now I'd like to illustrate another one of our key principles with another story, this time from our bat conservation efforts. Just off the coast of Taima village, there is a small uninhabited island called Tangkuladi. And what is special about this island is that it's a roosting site for thousands of native Sulawesi flying foxes or fruit bats. The bats roost in the trees of the island all day long, and then every night they fly off to the mainland, where they play an essential role in maintaining the health of Tompotika's forests by pollinating trees, dispersing seeds, and the like. Sadly, however, about a decade ago, the bats were under increasing pressure from hunting. Although few Tompotikans eat bats, some local hunters were using hooks and nets to catch them by the thousands to be shipped for sale in distant bushmeat markets. The hunting continued, and huge numbers of bats also died while being shipped, decimating the Tangkuladi bat population. Aalto began discussions in the village about trying to protect them. This is Rustin. He was one of 10 landowners on Tangkuladi Island and the main bat hunter in the village, though that wasn't his sole livelihood. Rustin vociferously opposed any effort to stop the hunting, but he was gradually overruled by his neighbors. People in the village began to feel that the bat hunting was cruel and wasteful, and they were learning about the critical role that bats play in keeping forests and fruit trees healthy. Eventually, Rustin came around to his neighbors' wishes. And so, after months of negotiation, Aalto signed a conservation lease with all 10 village landowners, establishing Tangkuladi as a new conservation area and ending hunting on the island. A schedule was also created for the landowners to share guard duty on the island. Rustin signed to and collected his lease payment. The bats immediately seemed to respond to their new safety and began to settle into a more stable routine of daytime resting and nightly foraging without the stress of the constant hunting threat. But a few months later, Rustin approached our Aalto team and announced that he was reneging on the lease and his agreement to end hunting. A bat dealer from the bushmeat market was coming next week, and he intended to catch as many bats as he could to sell to him. He didn't care about what he'd agreed to or the bats. He could get good money for them. We were dismayed. A series of meetings and conversations began. Rustin was sullen and combative. He blamed others. He pouted. He made impossible claims. It was not easy listening to him. What could be done to persuade Rustin to keep his promise and maintain protections? If Rustin reneged, the whole agreement would collapse. Other villagers were frustrated too, but not encouraging. Rustin's always like that, they said. You can't trust him. Just forget it. It did not look good. But we decided to just keep sitting with him, sitting and talking and mostly listening for 3 days. And as we sat underneath Rustin's bluster, I could tell that he too was not happy with the idea of resuming hunting. Whatever that conservation thing was that we at Aalto were part of, somehow I had the sense that he too wanted to be a part of it. So let's sit together a little longer. Finally, Rustin lowered his voice and asked us to move off to a place out of sight of the rest of the village. And then it came out. Rustin didn't really want to hunt the bats anymore. He wanted to find a way to stop. But in order to purchase the bat hunting equipment, he'd gotten himself in debt to the bat boss that was coming. And unless he hunted some more bats, he had no way to pay it off. He was embarrassed about this, but he saw no way out. So that's what was at the bottom of all of this. With a little more discussion, we came up with a plan. 2 days later, the Aalto team showed up with a truck, and piled in front of Rustin's house was a big heap of bat hunting equipment: hooks, lines, nets, storage boxes, etc. It was weapons buyback time. Aalto's purchase of the hunting equipment was paid and receipted, and a few days later, it was all destroyed. Rustin now had enough money to pay off the bat boss, and with the equipment gone, no one, not Rustin or anyone else, would be able to hunt bats anymore. And in the days that followed, Rustin underwent a rather miraculous transformation. Where before he'd held himself outside, He was now a proud member of Team Conservation, and he took on his new role with gusto. In the following days of discussions in the village, Rustin suddenly became one of conservation's strongest advocates. Many noticed his radical change, and it helped tip several subsequent discussions toward conservation. Sometimes all that's really needed is just really hard listening. And when we got really quiet, we were pretty sure that we could hear over across the water on Tangkuladi the sound of bats cheering. That was in 2014. Now, 10 years later, there's been no further hunting, and villagers have even advised people in other villages that they should stop allowing hunting of their bats. And the estimated number of bats on Tangkuladi has tripled from 10,000 to 30,000. Each one of those is a bat, those specks. But Alto is not all success and recovery. In the last couple of years, we're now facing the most serious challenge to conservation and to all the work we've done that we've ever confronted. This is the tropical forest that lies at the heart of the Tompatika Peninsula and that serves as, in Islander Joel Cooperberg's terms, the common welfare, the common good for virtually all the native wildlife in the area as well as local human communities. It is now in dire threat of almost total destruction for new nickel mines. Now, I don't have time to go much into this here, and if you're interested in this topic, I refer you to our website where you can watch a 12-minute video that will tell you all about the mining issue. But suffice it to say this, currently the worldwide appetite for nickel is skyrocketing, primarily due to the boom in demand for electric vehicles which use nickel in their batteries. Most of the world's nickel comes from Indonesia, and most of Indonesia's nickel comes from Sulawesi. Mining for nickel completely and permanently destroys large swaths of rainforest. 8 major new nickel mines have already been permitted for the Tompatika area, with another 10 or so in the pipeline. If all of these mines are developed to their full extent, it could destroy everything we have accomplished for the Maleo and for 21 other threatened and endangered species, in addition to poisoning the air and water for local human communities. So push is coming to shove, and we must gird our loins and harness all the weapons we have to bring to this battle. And what are those? Well, here are 3 of the most important that we intend to use, all of which are closely related to Vashon Island. First, it's all about relationships. In community-based conservation, just as on a small island like Vashon, we are all accountable to one another and dependent on one another for the long haul. Alto's success in advocating for conservation will depend a lot on how we build and maintain relationships of trust and respect across all our differences. Second, here we are in Vashon Center for the Arts. I don't have to explain to you that art touches the soul. It brings out the best of humanity. Vashon Islanders know this, and Alto was born on Vashon. I believe that all Alto has done to encourage drama and music and visual arts and dance has already made a huge difference in building support for the Maleo. And going forward, we will need to continue to build support for forests and nature in the face of mining through the facilitating the arts like those and our biennial festival. And now, before talking about the last most important thing, I'd like to take a pause for a little poll. Why are you here today? Most of you paid good money to come to this event, and I'd like you to think for a moment about the primary reason you did that. There might be several reasons, but I want you to think about the biggest one. Are you here primarily because you knew that the tropical rainforests of Indonesia are essential for stabilizing Earth's climate, and you thought I might give clues as to how to save them? Raise your hand if that's the reason. Got one. Okay. Are you here because, Are you here because you believe that free ecosystem services provided by nature are undervalued in our society, and you thought the Maleo bird might be an interesting case study in this? Okay, we got a few there. Good. Are you here because you thought you would gain economic benefits by coming to this talk today? Nary a one. Oh, well, there's one. Or maybe you're here mostly because you just love animals and birds and nature, and you thought it might be cool to hear about some weird ones in Indonesia. Ha 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 ha. Yes. More than anything else, we're here because of love. Oh God, she's going to talk about love. Next, she's going to ask us to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I was giving a talk recently at a scientific conference, and I presented all my graphs and charts and everything, and then I uttered the word love. And I immediately saw the guys in the front row start to slouch down in their streets and squirm. Because scientists don't want to talk about love. They don't know how to measure it. They don't know how to define it. And scientists like to think that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Thank you, Gary. But isn't it possible that what matters most could be the thing that's hardest to measure? Let me tell you about this man, Warman, who's been one of my most important teachers about nature love. Now, if you read the scientific and popular literature about conservation outreach and about how to make conservation more appealing to local people, you will be advised to emphasize what's in it for me, economic benefits that conservation brings, for instance, or ecosystem services, health benefits, or other ways that conservation can be useful to humans. This is especially the case if the people you're dealing with are poor or in developing countries. The idea is that poor people are going to be concerned mostly with economics because they're poor. And yes, those factors are important and must not be ignored. But Warman teaches us something different. Oh, sorry, not done with Warman. Warman is a poor fisherman with a 6th grade education living in Taima village where he and his family look out on the Bat Island. Now, back when we were having the village discussions about trying to reduce the bat hunting, to be honest, we didn't even mention love. We thought it would be a pretty hard sell. Bats are not like Maleos. They're often considered pests because they sometimes eat farmers' fruits, and they can be noisy and stinky. So in our outreach about bats, we focused more on the ecosystem services that bats offered and how hunting them could spread diseases, practical things like that. Now, Warman had no particular reason to love bats. He could potentially even have made money off helping bat hunters. But one day, as the village was in the middle of these discussions about protection of the island, Warman appeared out of the blue and asked if he could read a poem he had just written about bats. Warman's poem says, in translation, "I am a bat who inhabits the island. Oh, dear nature lovers, protect us from the calamities that are created by humans who have no mercy upon us." And then the poem finishes, "Goodbye, feckless human that hunts us. Someday we will all learn anew through hands that love us." Someday we will all learn anew through hands that love us. Warman gives the lie to the conventional wisdom that the best way to promote conservation is to emphasize human self-interest. As this poor fisherman teaches us, maybe if we are all to learn anew, it must be through compassion, through hands that love us. In fact, since working in Tompatika, I would argue that failure to acknowledge and celebrate love of nature when working with poor communities is a double misstep. It overlooks the power of nature love in motivating human actions, and it disrespects poor communities, as if just because they're poor, they're more likely to be purely self-interested than the wealthy. Or take Udil. Udil lives in a village close to a big patch of Tompatika forest, and when I met him about 10 years ago, he was introduced to me as one of the most skilled and enthusiastic hunters in the village. Udil has probably been responsible for the deaths of more endangered species than just about anyone else in Tompatika. When I first met Udil, we bonded over detailed discussions about all the wildlife of the forest. I learned from him about all the animals he knows so well from having hunted them, how the anoa will struggle to the death when caught in a snare, but a babirusa will give up, how the marsupial cuscus comes down from the tree to defecate. He learned from me the discoveries of science, how tarsiers in our area won't respond to the calls of those from other areas because they speak a different language, and how many of our Tompatika species have declined to near extinction and elsewhere are already gone. Both we on the Alto team and Udil have come to treasure how pooling our scientific and traditional knowledge enriches us both. Udil is the quintessential woodsman, having grown up and spent much of his time in the forest. He's an enormously skilled spotter and tracker. He knows all the edible plants in the forest. He knows which vines will yield water and which plants are medicinal, like this herb that keeps your eyes healthy. He never brings a tent when we go on expeditions into the forest because in minutes he can build himself a watertight leaf palace using nothing but his machete. Here, he made one for me too. He can shimmy up a tree in seconds, and he travels the forest with a watch rooster because the rooster will warn him about snakes. In economic terms, Udil is a poor man. He lives in a small, simple house with his wife and 3 children and cobbles together a livelihood from coconut farming, hired labor, and whatever he can come up with. As a hunter, he would eat and give away or sell the meat he got. But he says he didn't do it primarily for the meat. Hunting was my hobby, he says. But Udil doesn't hunt anymore. As he recently told a group of hunters, I used to hunt and snare everything, anoas, maleos, junglefowl, babirusa, everything. But then I met Alto and learned that these animals are protected and that they're endangered, so I stopped hunting. I don't want to hunt anymore. Udil hunted not primarily because he needed the meat, but because he loved the animals and being in the forest. Hunting was the vehicle to get him there. All we had to do was recognize that and give him other outlets to express his love of nature. Now, Udil is our best forest guide and patroller. He facilitates conservation land purchases, and he's the best possible advocate in our outreach campaign to end hunting of threatened species. There is no more powerful force for conservation in Tompatika than Udil. And that's where it comes back to Vashon. This boy is holding a banner made for World Maleo Day. Save Maleo. We all love Maleo. On purpose in English, expressly, in order to send a message to the outside world. The people of Tompatika love their Maleo. They asked for our help in 2006, and they still want it. and for all the many ways in which we have helped and may still be able to do so, perhaps the most important is one we probably haven't even given much thought to. It's just part of who we are. Yes, the funding has helped, and yes, the science has helped. But it's my hunch that the main reason our Tompotika conservation efforts have been so much more successful than anything anywhere else in Sulawesi is because of our love. Here on Vashon and in the Pacific Northwest, we unabashedly and enthusiastically love nature. Vashon has dozens of environmental organizations and thousands of avowed tree huggers, bird twitchers, and insect nerds. And all that love that we pour into our nature here in our home, it fills up and it spills over and it builds up our nature love muscles so that we can give to and even go to other places in the world like Tompotika, where publicly loving nature is really swimming upstream. And it keeps those nature love muscles strong, even against powerful opposition. And it helps us see nature love and encourage it in people there. The kids, the Warmans, the Udils, and yes, even the Rustens, who, of course, already have deep wells of it, but hidden. All we've done is help to bring it out into the sunshine and put it to work. So maybe taking inspiration from the poor villagers of Tompotika who stepped up to nature love and voluntarily changed their consumption for the sake of Maleos, bats, and anoas, we too, maybe, here on Vashon Island, might be inspired to step up to nature love and reduce our consumption for the sake of the whole planet. Thank you, Vashon, for the love. I hope you can now see and celebrate what it's doing in the world. So now, the Maleo is recovering. What's next? Thank you. Questions? Yes. I'm sorry, say that again? What do the poachers do with the eggs? Mostly they sell them. The eggs are kind of a luxury item like caviar, so it's a status symbol. So the poachers were usually selling them for a bit of cash. Yes, Will? Could you tell us more about your work with sea turtles? Sure. So with sea turtles actually nest on a lot of the same beaches as Maleo birds. And so we were there anyway, and we noticed sea turtles nesting like Maleos, and for the same reasons, sea turtles have been in tremendous decline due primarily to the taking of their eggs. So we basically do the same thing. We patrol the nesting beaches. In the case of the turtles, it turns out to be impossible to leave the eggs in place and protect them. So we do relocate turtle eggs to an enclosed hatchery area. We keep them safe until hatching, and then we release them immediately. Sea turtles, we've been doing this for a while. Sea turtles can take 20 years or so to reach sexual maturity. So that's another exercise in patience. You've got to stick with it a long time without expecting to see any results. But what we found in other parts of the world is that if you can protect the eggs on nesting beaches, turtle populations can and do recover. So that's what we're hoping for.
And what species of turtle is it?
We have 3 species of turtles in Tompotika. We have green turtles, olive ridley turtles, and the most critically endangered is the hawksbill turtle, which is really in rough shape around the world. So, yes, in the back.
You mentioned that reduction of egg poaching changed the behavior of the Maleo. In what ways did that happen?
Well, so there are a lot of different cool things that we saw. The first thing that we started to see immediately was just birds taking longer to do their nesting. So everywhere else you go, because the eggs are being dug up, the birds lay their egg, and I think they know that they kind of just have to get this out and get out of there, because within an hour or two, there are people sitting on the edge of the nesting ground, and within an hour or two, they're going to come on the nesting ground and scare everything off and dig up the egg that just got laid. So immediately we started seeing that birds would just take their time a little bit more instead of in this very business-like, okay, get on there, lay the egg, get away. They were stopping to rest and preen and, just kind of change around, all kinds of sort of pointless behaviors that just because they can, they could do. We also have seen all kinds of things that have just been delightful to watch. For instance, with taking a little bit more time after they lay their egg, they have this little dance that they do after they lay an egg. And so when they've just laid the egg, they will change then from excavating their nesting hole to covering it back up. And as they're making that change, the female, she's been down in there in the pit laying her egg, and she comes out, and she comes up, and she does this little dance. And I mean, you can imagine passing a big egg like that, she's pretty happy. So, but these are the kinds of things that just aren't seen in other locations, because the birds are under pressure in these places. They've just got to get that egg, and it's hopeless for them anyway, I think, because they, maybe they know that it's that egg has little chance of actually making it to adulthood. So the more we look, the more we see about different changes in what it's like to just not be under pressure anymore. Imagine all the stresses in your life disappearing, and then you can start to imagine what it might be like for them. Yeah, and I'll come back to you. Yes?
Can you describe or demonstrate the sounds that Maleos make?
Not well. Some of my staff most certainly can. They have several different vocalizations. The males have a kind of a turkey-like call, that they'll do when they're separated and they're calling their mate down onto the nesting ground. And so there's that sort of turkey-like gobble call. There's a wah, 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 which is sort of, females more often will use that for their calling. And then they also have this really delightful, you can only hear it if you are like in a blind and very within a couple of meters of the birds, because it's so soft. But it's almost like, I've called it grunt purring, because it's a very soft vocalization, noise that they make while they seem to be contentedly excavating. And it's very quiet, and they just sort of, imagine your cat purring. I can't do it, but it's delightful. So, yes, in the back.
As part of your work, have you been able to use the same principles of relationship and listening and persistence with your NGO colleagues and others who are in the conservation world who are using different approaches for saving the whale?
Yeah. So we do what we can. Oh, yes, right. Okay, so the question was, have we been able to use these same principles like respect and patience and listening with our NGO colleagues in other projects? So we do what we can. It's a little tricky. We don't want to seem self-righteous, and everybody can see that the results that Alto is getting are just off the charts compared to everywhere else. So we try not to sort of say, well, hey, folks, this is how you should do it. At the same time, when asked, we certainly try to share that, we have found it isn't necessary to manipulate the eggs or to, interfere with them. And there's a lot of, we're all humans, and other NGOs and other groups have other agendas also everybody wants to help the Maleo recover, but they also, for example, want to be able to take photos when they release chicks. And you can't take a photo of a chick that's hatching in a natural nesting ground because they hatch at night and they fly off on their own. So you lose the photo op. And the ones running the hatcheries want to have the photo op because that's what gets them their funding, or that's what gets them their government support. And so it's complicated. So we try to go by the adage that the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better, and just hope that sooner or later it will come out. So. Yes.
How do you cultivate a love relationship with an international nickel company? And also, as the volcano, the recent volcano eruption.
Oh, thanks for asking about that. The volcano was quite far away from us, so it didn't affect our people at all. And honestly, it's the Ring of Fire. We don't have volcanoes near us, but we have earthquakes all the time. So it's kind of, it's what people kind of live with. But how do you cultivate a relationship of love with an international nickel mining company? That's a good question, and we're actually trying to find out. So we hired a new position a little over a year ago, a mining outreach manager, whose specific job it is to try to build relationships with mining companies, with government, and with local communities to address the mining question. And we've actually had some tentative, hopeful signs on that. Some of the mining companies that we have had contact with have said, it's just words so far, but they have said that they are interested in working with us to try to protect Maleo and make sure that things aren't as destructive because the truth is most of those companies don't have any idea about the impacts on biodiversity. They know about the impacts on people, but on the rest of the environment, forests, biodiversity, whatever, they don't know anything about that. And so some of them are open to at least conversations. And when you can make a human connection, that's when it can begin. And so we'll see. Ask me again in a couple of years. So, yes, you patiently waited again.
How many eggs does the Maleo bird lay in a year?
How many eggs does the Maleo bird lay in a year? Good question. If you look on the internet, you will see claims of 8 to 12 eggs per year. That was somebody's guess some years ago, and it is just that, a guess. We've been doing the research on that. We have 13 birds banded with color bands so we can tell. They recognize them as individuals when they come back. And based on the preliminary results from that research, that's way too high. It's probably half that. So we don't know, but again, ask me again in about another year or two, and we will have the results of that research, and I'll be able to tell you in much more detail. But what it means is that each of those pairs is only going maybe 4 or 5 times a year to lay 1 egg at a time. Those eggs are precious.
And how long?
Yes.
How long do they live?
They live really long. There is a Maleo in captivity that is 42 years old and counting. Yeah. In the wild, they probably only live into teens, 20s, something like that. But they're, relatively speaking, a long-lived species. They take a few years to reach sexual maturity. So, yeah. Yes?
Monitor lizard, that's a predator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they ignore it?
the adults just ignore them. The monitor lizards are at the nesting ground every day. They come around, and what they're looking for is eggs that might have gotten like kicked up to the top, or very rarely, once in a while, a weak chick or something like that that's still in the sand. And so they will come to the nesting ground every day and cross, and they're sniffing around with their tongues and sniffing to try to find anything that they might be able to glean there. But the adult Maleos, they never attack adult Maleos. And the adult Maleos just sort of say, oh, you again, okay, get on with it. And and then they just carry on. They don't have any fuss with each other. Yes, Anne?
Is there a market for, given the value of the eggs, at least locally, have you run into international trafficking, either of birds or eggs?
Yeah, there's it's covered by CITES, so that's a really serious offense if you are caught in international trafficking. But it is a delicacy, and there is, not from our area, but from some parts of Sulawesi where Maleos are still hanging on, there is internet sale of Maleo eggs. And so, yeah, there is some of that goes on, particularly to China. And there's also something growing called culinary tourism, and we've had inquiries from people who didn't know us very well and wondered whether we would provide eggs for culinary tourists. So, yeah.
And the answer was?
Yeah.
The birds themselves, are some in captivity, and is there a market in zoos, for example?
So they're hard to keep in captivity. And for many years, the first ones outside of Indonesia were here in the US. The Indonesian government gave some to the Bronx Zoo, which kept them on an island off Georgia for a number of years. And they managed to survive, but they refused to reproduce. So then they brought them off the island and to the zoo in New York, and they worked super hard for years and years and years, and they finally got them to breed, and they got some eggs, and the eggs then broke and didn't hatch, or the chicks died, or whatever. But after more and more years, they have finally figured out how to breed Maleos in captivity. So you will now be able to see Maleos in zoos in several places in the United States and around the world that are captive bred. But it's not easy. And the lore in Tompotika is that if Maleos are captured, they commit suicide because they usually die very quickly, and that's how people explain it.